Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. Today, we are diving into a topic that affects so many. We're going to talk about burnout, and we're also going to talk about the critical role that social connection plays in our life, specifically related to burnout. We're joined by my guest today, Lesley Waldron, a burnout coach who's going to share her insights on balancing connection while juggling the demands of being a sandwich caregiver. Which, if you don't know what that is, Lesley is both a parent and a caregiver to her own parents. Now, before we begin, I want to set the stage because this isn't an episode with a magic solution, unfortunately. Instead, Lesley and I are here to acknowledge a challenging situation that many of you may be facing. We're going to offer some small, tangible ways that you can implement into your own life, give them a try, and we're here to provide encouragement. At the end of the day, we're exploring a conundrum that many of us face. It is harder to make connections when we're burnt out, yet those connections are crucial for our well-being. If you've ever felt overwhelmed and exhausted by everything you have to do while still worrying that you aren't doing enough, and this describes every woman I know, including myself, by the way. If you've tried to find so many ways to get yourself out of the cycle, then this episode is for you. Now, stick with me here. I want to dive just a little bit deeper into a couple of things before we get into the episode. I'm talking about burnout, and I bring up this concept of emotional labor in the episode, and I just want to give you a little bit of a precursor. So if you are out there and you're a caregiver, I want to acknowledge that you face numerous stressors. And a stressor is an external factor that activates the stress responses in your body. This accumulation of stress triggers neurological and physiological shifts, which means that your entire body and mind change in response to these external stressors. Your heart beats faster, your blood pressure increases, your muscles tense, you become more alert, your focus shifts to short-term thinking because you're trying to solve this stressful problem. Your memory prioritizes what's immediately relevant. I am sure that if you are a caregiver, so many of these sound real, and that's because, as you know, you're experiencing stress. And it's not that we'll never have stress, but instead that we need to learn how to move through the stress and complete the cycle. There's a book I can't recommend you read enough. It is called Burnout: The Secret to Unlock the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And in their book, they talk about how to complete this cycle. They suggest several methods. Number 1, and the most effective, is physical activity. Number 2, breathing. Number 3, positive social interaction, which is just casual, friendly interactions that show that the world is a safe place. In episodes previously where you've heard me talk about this idea that if you have more acquaintances, studies show people are happier, bingo, right here. This is why. The 4th way to complete the cycle is laughter. The 5th is affection, which Amelia and Emily categorize as deeper connection with someone who likes, respects, and trusts you. Now, this person could be a partner, it could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could also be a pet, or even a spiritual connection, they write in their book. The 6th way to complete the cycle is a good cry, and the 7th is creative expression. How do you know when you've completed the cycle? Your body tells you. You feel a shift, whether that's in your mood or your mental state. Maybe it's physical sensations in your body. You might breathe more deeply or just notice that your thoughts are quieting. Why am I telling you all this before we get into this episode? Because I want you to have an understanding of what burnout is. And I want you to note that 2 of the ways that they suggest completing the cycle have to do with connection. And yet, so many messages out there, you've heard me talk about this before, there's that advice to just self-care your way out of it, to find that magic solution, the routine or the breathing exercise, the green smoothie. But often, these just feel like more to-do list items in our day. And in previous episodes, I've talked about this idea of not following this narrative of needing to be self-reliant. That self-carrying our way out of it is a scam, but instead, we need to lean into community and connection. But here is the thing, you're going to hear me bring this up in today's episode. Building and maintaining the connections that we need is its own form of work. Emotional labor, which women especially are already doing enormous amounts of. So that's where I am now. We have a crucial question. In order to get the support we need, do we take on even more emotional labor? Or do we go it alone? If you do the work, will those new friendships and community actually show up for you in the ways that you need? And that's hard because if you have past examples of disappointment where people didn't show up for you, it can be really hard to push past those fears and do the work. Our guest today is Lesley Waldron. She's a women's health coach on a mission to support and inspire women in their 40s and beyond to feel wildly well. As an experienced personal trainer, integrative women's health coach, and NLP practitioner, Lesley brings a wealth of knowledge on how to prioritize self-care, find joy in movement, and embrace aging, particularly during the perimenopause transition. In today's episode, Lesley talks a lot about the small pressure release valves that she has built into her life, mainly integrating her friendships in small ways, being mindful of how her and her friends show up for each other, and acknowledging the emotional labor involved. And most importantly, she shares what this entire experience feels like, because if you are also going through this, you might wonder if it's only you, and I'm here to tell you that it's not. By the end of this episode, I hope that you'll feel less alone if you're in this situation. I hope that you'll remember that the message that you need to be entirely self-reliant and self-care your way out is, frankly, bullshit. You deserve to carve out time to find your own soft places to land, just as you provide for others if you're a caregiver. And while the world might be pushing another green juice or supplement as the answer, sometimes, maybe quite often, the solution is a conversation, a hug, a swim date, a walk, or a living room dance party with a friend. So let's dive into today's episode and explore how we can navigate burnout and nurture the connections that help us complete the cycle, even when it feels like we're running on empty.
Hi, Lesley. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's lovely to be here with you.
I mean, I appreciate anybody who wants to come on and talk about community and friendship and tell our stories. I am sure that a lot of people listening are going to relate. Do you want to tell us a little bit maybe about your current life phase? Like what's going on, what's on your plate, what you're juggling?
Sure. Thank you, Alex. I'm in my late 40s. I have 2 children who are at secondary school. They wouldn't be quite in high school in the US. They are 11 and 13. I also have a caring responsibility for my mother who has dementia, who has Alzheimer's. And I live just outside Bristol in the southwest of the UK, and I run my own small health coaching business and work as well as a master coach for the school in the US, where I initially did my qualification. So I'm kind of juggling lots of different things, and sometimes it feels that there's not a lot of space for the fun stuff.
And I think it's important to mention that coaching you do, which you're so sweetly like trying to just say, I'm a coach. You coach on burnout.
Yeah. Midlife burnout, particularly.
For listeners to know, because burnout and connection are very connected.
It's such an important part of how we restore ourselves and how we create resilience through connection, I think, and through, like, women, particularly when we are stressed. I found this a really interesting fact to learn some time ago.
Yeah.
We produce more of the hormone oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone. So when we're stressed, we have more of an impetus to connect and bond with others, because that is part of how we reduce our stress levels, and about how it's about safety, isn't it? About being part of a group, part of a tribe. And it's part of our long-term health and well-being. But often the women who I'm coaching who are right on the edge of burnout, I mean, most of my clients are in their mid to late 40s, early 50s. So they're in this perimenopause hormone transition. And so they've kind of got that going on, and they're really busy. And they're like me, they're juggling kids and business and work and elderly parents and all of the challenges that all of those things bring. And they're very close to burnout. And they have not had the time or space for friendships, perhaps for a decade. And that's kind of a piece of the puzzle. That's not everybody. I can definitely think of some exceptions in my own client base. But their priority has been family and work. And there's not been a lot of space for other things. And then if they do have part of friendship groups, then the gatherings tend to be big groups, big gatherings that feel like a social obligation and can actually add to the stress level, rather than being the restorative connection, genuine connection that we really need. And I've certainly seen from my own personal experience how those, like, I noticed, so in our perimenopause phase, quite often one of the things that can occur for women is changes in mood, feeling more anxious, feeling more low, perhaps changes in body shape and size that affect their overall confidence. And then they're tired, lethargy, kind of low energy. So the idea of trying to make an effort and try and present this, I've got it all together face, is exhausting. Whereas actually, if you were to have a conversation with a friend, with a small group of friends or one-on-one, you can walk away feeling restored and cared for and properly heard. And not all friendships are like that, but I think we all have friendships for different phases of our life and for different moods, almost. It can be a real struggle, I think, in this part of our life.
I mean, I think that what you're saying about the one-to-one makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think everybody's different. But when you're mixed up in a big group and you have to bring up hard things, that maybe changes the energy. So people won't do that. So then, we end up with people who feel lonely in a room full of people because they're not feeling like they were seen in this experience. And when you're one-on-one, it is a lot more likely that I think you leave feeling seen, whether or not you maybe even like had the in-depth conversation about the thing that was ailing you. Like, being seen might just be somebody saying, like, you seem really tired today. Do you want to sit instead of walk?
Yeah. Do you want a coffee or a glass of wine?
Tell me a little bit, in like your current phase of life, how you're enjoying connecting with people the most. Like, what are the things you're doing right now?
For me, it's definitely the time with friends one-to-one that feels the most restorative. And I tend to meet up with friends for a walk, or I swim outdoors year round. And so I meet friends for a swim. And I kind of have really lovely friendships, not loads of them. And then last night I had a conversation with a friend over the phone while I was waiting to pick up my daughter from her Explorers, which is like a youth group type thing.
Okay.
And that's a long explanation. I'm not going to go into it. And a friend from primary school. And so she lives miles away. So we don't always have that time to connect really well. Those friendships, those gatherings, those going for a walk feel really, really restorative to me because I'm outside. Conversation flows differently when you're walking, I always find. And those friends, the shared experiences feel really important. So whether it is that they also run their own business around other obligations, whether it is I've got a couple of friends who have experienced or are experiencing dementia in an elderly parent, friends who struggle with their children. And so for me, that feels like the most restorative thing. And that's what I will prioritize. Big nights out, the kind of things that I did in my 20s and even in my 30s, they just don't feel as attractive to me. I don't drink anymore because it disagrees with me. And I also find that I'm an early morning person. And so I much prefer to be tucked up in bed quite early in the evening than being out. You know, if I'm invited to a party nowadays, I will be the one that arrives first because I will also be the one that leaves earliest. I mean, I do some group things. I went to the theatre with some friends last week and that was really lovely. But because I knew this podcast was coming up, it was really interesting observing how that conversation felt fun, but not restorative in the same way that those conversations that I have walking and talking with friends do. So I have some friends I meet weekly and I build it into my life. So I have a Wednesday obligation to my mother, and she happens to live somewhere where there is this big lake, a marine lake it's called, tidal pool, I think, built by the Victorians. And so I tend to coordinate seeing my mother with meeting a friend and going for a walk. And we download and then swim. So it's a walk and a swim. I have another friend who I see for a walk every couple of weeks, and it's just before the kids come back from school, and often it's a parenting or a business or a caring for elderly parents type chat, and sometimes it's just silly, you know. So, but those are the connections that really matter to me, and those are people that I can see even if I am feeling like I haven't got anything to give. We talked briefly before we came on about the emotional load sometimes of friendships. And I am the kind of person who you can call in a crisis, and I will do whatever I can to support you. And often that's just listening is the most important thing. And a friend did that a few weeks ago, and we went for a walk in the rain and everything felt just a little bit better after that. But I also need to know that I can show up and not be that person that's the listening ear, that sometimes that's what I need too. And I'm a really positive person, but even at the moment, sometimes I struggle with that.
Understandably, you have a lot going on. Yeah.
So next, I know not to put on, like, wearing a fake mask of positivity is exhausting, isn't it? And so I don't want that in my friendships where I'm just the happy smiley. Bumped into somebody I knew on the bus today and we had a lovely chat and it was really nice, but I can do that for 10 minutes, but that's it. So
yeah, the topic of emotional labor and friendships, I mean, I'm planning to do some bigger episodes on this, but I just think it's really interesting because, especially in women, if I'm being honest, like a lot of women are doing so much emotional labor for the people around them that I think quite often we look at our female friendships as our outlet to be held, right? To like be on the receiving end of that emotional labor. But then what's happening is we're asking people who are already tapped out on emotional labor to do more for us, but we're getting some in return. But it's just a really interesting conundrum, I think, because then quite often, sometimes you show up and you don't have the capacity. You are burnt out. You cannot be the person who holds all that today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes people get in like a friendship problem, they get in an issue, they get in a fight, a struggle, whatever, because we want to be held. Like, we want to be on the receiving end, and this is our outlet. And then that person doesn't have capacity. And like, this is a greater issue of spreading out the emotional labor, not having it all fall on women. But I think that especially someone like yourself who is stuck in a sandwich caregiving role, it's just so important to be thinking about the amount of emotional labor, like acknowledging yourself for the amount of emotional labor you're already doing, that you also deserve for somebody else to do that for you.
Yeah.
The person on the other side of that conversation, what their capacity is and how they're feeling. And sometimes when they tell you that you're tapped out, like, even though you need it, acknowledging that you've also felt like they feel right now. The solution to this problem, I don't know. And I hope to discover at some point in this podcast, because we're talking like deep-rooted societal issues here. But women, especially sandwich caregiving roles, deserve that, and then are often in this situation where they're asking it from other people in a similar role. And that's just hard. That's a lot.
It is a lot. And so I think one of the things is, how do we take some of that labor away? And I think, as you say, that's quite a big societal issue, deeply ingrained in millennia of patriarchy as well.
I've thrown around this term emotional labor a couple times now, so I wanted to pop in and give you a definition, an additional resource you can go check out. And I want to explain a little bit why I keep bringing this up, because you might be like, Alex, where is this coming from? There is a book, of course there is, titled none other than Emotional Labor by Rose Hackman. I can't suggest it enough. Pick it up. It's such a good book. But in that book, Rose has a definition of emotional labor. And the definition is this: the primordial training that before anything else, women and girls should edit the expression of their emotions to accommodate and elevate the emotions of others. So here's what I find fascinating. Here's why I'm bringing this up. My experience. In so many, but not all. Like, I want to be very clear that this is not in all friendships, but there are friendships I have in which, when we get together to share life updates, I feel like it's almost like we take turns, that we sit around, maybe a room, maybe there's 5 gals, picture this with me. And it's almost as if everyone can take a turn letting their guard down. They can be honest and real and raw about what's happening in their life. And when that happens, everyone else around the room is expected to offer condolences, acknowledgement, so that that person feels seen in their struggles. Maybe it's happy news, and they're supposed to offer excitement and acknowledgement. Whatever they do, they're supposed to edit their expressions and emotions to show up a certain way. And I want to give you a very tangible example. Imagine these 5 girls are sitting around the table, and one of them decides to get real and raw and honest for a minute and announces that she is so excited. She got her dream job. She's moving across the country. Everyone in that table is supposed to act the same way. Now, mind you, maybe one person at that table, one woman, has wanted a promotion for a long time. And so she is simultaneously happy for her friend, and she's maybe a little jealous. Maybe you have another friend, the closest friend of the gal who just got her dream job and is moving across the country, and she is so happy for her friend. She's so happy. She wants her to have all the good things that could possibly happen in her life. And simultaneously, She is incredibly sad because now she just found out that her best friend is moving across the country. There is an expected way that everyone acts, and it's positive. We see this all the time. I see this on social media. I see this in shows. It's like if that girl admits that she is sad and happy, she's a bad friend. She can maybe admit that she's sad her friend is moving, but not right now. No. In this moment, there's a correct way for her to act. And so correct me if I'm wrong, anybody listening, but to me, that feels like what we want sometimes in some, maybe many of our friendships is for women to perform emotional labor for us. And yet we're all out here exhausted because as women, we are performing emotional labor for everybody else, for the men in our lives, to move forward in our careers, to make people feel comfortable as we take our kids out in public. We are so tired of editing and accommodating everybody else that we just want to get together with the girls so we can let loose. And sometimes I have been in groups where you really can just express your emotions. Like it's okay, you don't have to perform that emotional labor, but that is not always the case. And I think that this is a real struggle for a lot of women. I think it's an underlying issue that's out there. And it's why certain women are constantly holding their friendships at arm's length because they are so tired and burnt out from having to perform the emotional labor for everyone else around them that they interact with, that they don't also want to have to perform it with their female friends. Just a thought. That's why I keep bringing this up. And something for you to pay attention to in your own friendships. When you get together with a friend or a group, could be a single friend or a group of friends, do you actually feel free to just be yourself and express your emotions? Or do you feel like you have to take turns opening up and then performing this emotional labor? Now, I'm not saying that these are bad friendships, but I am saying I think you can change the culture. You could discuss this. You could share this episode. You could talk about it. You could start to change the way you all interact. And in this episode specifically, I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge all of this emotional labor that's going on, because if you are somebody who is in caregiving mode and you are feeling emotionally burnt out from holding everyone else's emotions around you, your kids, your partner, your parents, your community, whoever you're modifying your emotions for, you might feel like when you go to hang out with your friends, if they need you to perform that for them, you may not want to go. You may feel like you don't have anything else to give. I just hope that this sparks some thoughts and some conversation with me or with the people around you. I think about this piece when it comes to female friendships. In particular, I think about it all the time.
It seems like though you found a little bit of a hack, which what was coming to me when you were talking about it is when you meet up with people, you seem to have some sense of like what their role in your life is.
Absolutely.
And I think it's almost easier, probably, I guess, would be to show up when you have some sense of the work you're about to have to do. Whether it is they also have a family member with dementia, or they also own a business, or you generally relate to them about caregiving. Like instead of not knowing what might come hurling at you, you have some sense, maybe a little bit of like the mindset you're going in of where the other person needs to feel felt and seen, and so do you.
And I think some of that is about like the way in which, where those friendships came from, that there are similarities in how we've evolved in our life cycle. I think it's about being honest with yourself. And I have had friendships that like in recent years have just kind of just drifted away for reasons I actually couldn't really identify, but it was okay. It needed to be, it's a little sting, but it's like actually what I served my purpose in that relationship and we move on. I think for me, it's about being clear about what that relationship is. Like, I don't need to have a discussion with the friend, but just kind of being honest with myself. Like, what are my expectations, and can that person deliver it? I think about, I've made lovely friends through the kids, like through the school gates, through the things they've been interested in. And some of those friendships evolve, but some of them really do just stay at the surface level. And some of them really don't want or need to be involved in listening to my challenges either. So I think it's about honesty with myself, and then a bit of honesty or boundary setting, which doesn't have to be these are the rules of our friendship, but just about where conversations go. And knowing in yourself. I think one of the biggest pieces of work that I've done on myself is over the last decade or so has been, and perhaps comes with our 40s, that we are more self-aware, we know ourselves better, we're kind of entering in slowly into our wise woman years, perhaps. And so we can have that level of honesty and self-awareness, which then can inform our friendships and the depth of them and the role that they play in our lives. And we're all different as well. I need that. I know that I need that. I know the benefits that it brings to me. We all need friendships. It's like a part of our well-being, overall connection with other human beings. But for me, it's always been really important, and something that I've worked on, even when I lived thousands of miles away from friends. It's always been something. And even with friends, say from my friends I've known for 30 or more years, 36 years, I can think of two of them. And I see them maybe once or twice a year. And maybe we exchange a few messages. Maybe we have a couple of phone conversations in that year. But it doesn't matter. We don't have to work on it. So, but a lot of friends from 36 years ago, we've got no contact with at all. So, which shows how life evolves as well.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes I think about the people that we don't even think of anymore. Like, I will see a photo of somebody from maybe high school and be like, oh my gosh, that person was in my class. But I haven't thought about them in a long time.
Yeah.
And some people we keep thinking about how they are in our past, and other people are just gone. And for some reason, we put so much pressure on ourselves for the ones that like slightly linger but don't feel right anymore.
Yeah.
And yet we were able to just like forget that other people were there. And so much of that is, I think, just us choosing where our energy goes. Like you were saying, like the boundaries, being self-aware of that. And especially the older we all get, the more all of this is going to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like you've been, or you are very intentional about your social wellness and your connections. Would you say you've always been this way? Or do you think that over time you've leaned into this and like developed?
I think I've always been that way. I remember staying in touch with friends, but I was never the kind of person who was part of a massive group either. So like even through school, I moved when I was 10. And I think it's because both my parents were great at maintaining friendships and were quite, sociable's not quite the right word, but they have lots of friends. Like my dad's 80th birthday, there were friends from every decade of his life. It was amazing to see, from like every job and career and business that he'd been involved in and things like that. And so I think it's just always been a value of mine. And then as I've got older, I've really recognized the benefits of it. I remember when I was in my 20s and living in London, I would have a social engagement a couple of times a week. We'd meeting friends for dinner, meeting friends for drinks. And they were different groups of friends, like from university friends from different places that I'd worked. And I always had like this little group that we maintained that. But then once I left London, most of those groups just kind of dissolved. So friends remember you turning up to go and see them when they've got tiny babies and cooking them lunch and bringing them flowers and making them feel good about themselves. Friends remember when I'm a bit hopeless at remembering birthdays and sending gifts and things like that. But I will remember details about their parents and their work life, and I'm better at that kind of thing. And a deep, deep listening. But yeah, I think it is intentional, but not innate. I must have friends way. It's just part of how, kind of part of my values is around connection and authentic connection, I suppose.
I mean, there are a lot of people in that midlife phase who tell me that their parents didn't have friends, so it was never modeled. So hearing that it was modeled to you, it makes so much sense.
That's really interesting.
Because I think a lot of people struggle because they've never really seen the work, like the intentionality, the thought process, how you incorporate this in your life. And a lot of people are lost on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Circling back to what you said about the emotional, like the cost of friendship, like that there is an emotional cost. And so perhaps when we're overwhelmed and almost in burnout, what we see is the cost of friendship, perhaps more than the benefit. And particularly if we haven't had it modeled, or if we struggled with friendships in the past, where friendships have gone wrong. So we feel like we can't, our confidence is low, or we're worried about getting hurt, then that's going to stop us from reaching out. And I suppose I haven't had that I'm just lucky in a way. I've had friends drift away, but I haven't had that. So actually, I feel like, along with my many other privileges of education and where I live and the colour of my skin, that's another privilege, isn't it? That I haven't experienced bullying or friendship problems. That means that I'm still open. I haven't had a reason why I would close off.
Don't get me wrong. I think that the benefits far outweigh the quote unquote cost of friendship.
100%. Yeah.
I just think that in a world where a lot of people are feeling very burnt out, and a huge reason for burnout is lack of boundaries and lack of like spending the time to self-reflect and think about your capacity, and then put boundaries with yourself of, I'm going to stop working at 5 p.m. every day. I'm going to take myself outside and go on a walk. I'm going to whatever. There's so many of those, not even friendship related. But if you don't do that self-reflection and realize that you are so burnt out, and then the expectation is that you show up and provide a bunch of emotional labor that you really don't have capacity for, a lot of the messaging out there is just that you should always provide that emotional labor. That's like expected in your friendships, no matter what. And when you don't, then somebody's mad at you for not doing it. And I think part of the problem is we're not even acknowledging the fact that friendships require work, that there is emotional labor there, that like the hope is that you get something out of it. But if you don't go into it intentionally, like you would in any other area of your life, you can come out on the negative.
We haven't done this in a while, but I'm about to give you a correction. I did not say that well in the moment. I actually listened back and I considered cutting that entire section because I feel like it's a big yikes, but I also feel like it's a learning opportunity, and maybe it also will show you like I don't get this right all the time, especially in the moment. So here's what I should have said. In that section, I am taking a structural failing and I am pinning it on you. I'm pushing hyper independence, which in my mind is a big yikes. Instead, what I should have said is, we live in a capitalistic society where people are endlessly struggling just to survive. Because of that, so many people have to work 1 million hours to afford their bills or their childcare or their medical expenses. Many people come home and have little time to recharge. Now, some people have the privilege that they're going to be able to get out of that cycle, and they're going to be someone who can just stop working at 5, like I suggest, or take themselves out for a self-reflection walk. And I'm pointing all of this out because, as I've talked about in many episodes before, social connection is just harder these days. It is. And I think a lot of us put that on ourselves as a failure, a personal failure, but so much of it is not. It is a societal failure. We live in a world that makes it harder to get the social connection and the support that we need. And although I would love to just wave a magic wand and change all of these structures and change, honestly, a lot of things about the ways that we're all living, I can't do that. So what I have seen work for people, what people have messaged me about, who have implemented this stuff in their lives, who are feeling this burnout, who are feeling run down by the structures, who are working a million hours, this is what I have seen. What they tell me is the biggest impact is to, one, spend time acknowledging that social connection in their lives requires effort, that they have to take accountability for this. Like, we have to accept that this is another thing we have to plan and schedule for and prioritize. Number two, then they need to sit down and plan to find the time. Even if it's 15 minutes, if it's an hour once a week, if it is an hour once a month, if it is an hour a quarter, whatever you can fit into your schedule, commit to that. And number three is to get really intentional, to spend a little bit of time thinking about what is going to make the biggest impact in the time you have. Reflect on whether the people you're spending your time with, the communities you are surrounding yourself with, if they are providing you with the respite and the reset and that closing of the stress cycle that you need. And if they aren't, you need to go back, plan, reflect, and find some new people in your life, shift your energy to other people you already have. I have plenty of episodes. Go back through my archives. I talked how to do that. If that is you, I talk about how to do that. And then number four is take action. With the time that you have, whatever it is, take action.
Having that boundaries and self-awareness is what we go back to, which is quite a lot of the work that I do with my clients is about boundaries and self-awareness. And that applies to friendship as much as work and family obligations. But even without family, I was talking to you, I had a session with a client a few weeks ago, and she works from home. She doesn't have children. She's similar age to me. And because they now work from home since the pandemic, she and her partner just work all the time. And then it gets harder to find, because they're also then tired all the time, it gets harder to find time for friendships and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting how we can prioritize some things that if we were able to take the time to reflect and step back a little bit, maybe we would change those completely.
Yes. You mentioned very, very early on in the podcast that a lot of people are a little like blindly maybe prioritizing like work and a family, but I mainly mean by that like immediate family, kids.
Yeah.
And giving, like caregiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really think that societally, that's what a lot of people have been told should be your top priorities.
Yeah. Or it's been modeled, as you say.
Yeah, or it's been modeled. And when you ask people what their top priorities are, like what's going to be most meaningful at the end of their life, connection in general is often top of the list.
Yeah.
But we're not prioritizing that in our daily life. And you've mentioned values a few times. It's kind of like, this is a high value, but you're not
making it a priority.
You're not making a priority. And then actually, if we connect this back to the whole thing, it's like if you're taking all this action and at the end of the day, a lot of it doesn't align with your values, then wouldn't that make sense that it leads to burnout?
Absolutely. So perhaps we could see friendships as both a symptom or a lack of deep and meaningful friendships and a solution. I mean, it's always part of a bigger picture, isn't it, in terms of how we look after ourselves. But I think if we were to kind of divide it into a great big pie, would be a significant slice is that sense of connection to other people. And I think an understanding that you can shape that in a way that feels right for you. And then so that comes back again to boundaries. And you don't have to be able to state them. Sometimes it's necessary, but knowing what they are is really important. Knowing that actually, do you know what? Although I really love and admire this friend, today I know I can't take it on.
And I hope that inspires someone who has listened to this episode to maybe say that exact thing to themselves. That if you needed permission, that it's okay to do that, we're here to give it to you.
Yeah.
Lesley, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing what's working for you and maybe giving people some ideas of how they can approach this in their everyday life, especially if they are juggling a lot. Like a lot. You were juggling so much in this season of life.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved our conversation, and it's made me think too about the value of friendships and to be kind and compassionate towards myself for having got that in my life, because I think I would be struggling otherwise.
Yeah. As I like to say, you are doing the thing. And a lot of people want to be out there doing it. So it's important to be sharing the stories of what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
I don't know if this ended up being like the most uplifting episode I've ever done, that's for sure. I wish this episode had all the answers. I wish it could just be that magic wand. I wish I could tell you if you are experiencing burnout or are a caregiver or a sandwich caregiver, what exactly to do. I do think that this episode might have made some people feel seen. Just acknowledge that you feel stuck in this situation. And I do think that there were some takeaways. Like if you are in the season of life where you are squeezing in connection, you aren't alone. That there are some small ways to integrate connection into your life. One of those would be maybe scheduling those reoccurring get-togethers or getting really specific on the ways that you are connected to certain friends, the way that you are showing up for each other, the emotional labor that you are personally set up to do for them. If you go back, I do have some fun episodes on how to like integrate your life if you feel like you're in this caregiver. Like the one that comes to mind is I have, I think it's episode 28. We'll link it in the show notes, but it's like the slumber party episode. It's Erica, family, talking about how she gets together with another family. This is kind of how they started hanging out, right? And integrating into your life. But at the end of the day, no matter what ways that you try to make small shifts, I hope that you see that it's just small changes, small steps. Try something little. And if it works, great, you're one step closer. And if you're not, try something else. Because the small shifts, they add up. I have seen it happen in people's lives. I felt it in my own life. And I think that those small shifts, just knowing that, my hope for you, if you are in this season of life, would be that those small shifts do make an impact. They can help you close the stress cycle. They can help you find the support and the connection that you need in your life. And hopefully, they can help you over time get out of that burnout cycle. With that, I'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.